Starting in the early 1990s, the Virgin New Adventures promised a bold new era for Doctor Who, but almost immediately had trouble living up to it, with two of the first three books unapologetically bland and unimaginative. With the Timewyrm arc coming to a close, yet barely having developed beyond its opening volume, it was beginning to become make or break time for the VNAs. Could newcomer Paul Cornell turn the tides and finally show off the depth and quality the book range promised to deliver? It's time to find out. This is the Library of St John the Beheaded, a history of Doctor Who in prose, and today I'm going to be looking at Timewyrm Revelation. Paul Cornell was a known writer in the Doctor Who fanzine community, having written many stories in the 1980s, and had just had his first professional tale published in Doctor Who magazine when he saw the news about the forthcoming book range. Virgin editor Peter Darville Evans in turn wanted to prove to the audience and Virgin that he was open to new writers, and so commissioned Cornell on the quality of his submission, a retooled version of Total Eclipse, a multi-part 5 Nyssa and Tegan story he'd written for the Queen Bat fanzine a few years earlier. Cornell reckons he got the gig because of his great emphasis on the Timewyrm. The book was promoted by a short story called Cathedral Heart, published in Doctor Who magazine shortly before the novel came out. And so to the book. The first three Virgin New Adventures had excellent prologues. Indeed, in two cases they were the best parts of the book, but they definitely just felt like pre-credit sequences or a bit of additional background. The Revelation prologue is a different beast. It opens with what seems like the Doctor sneaking out of lessons on Gallifrey to visit his hermit friend, the one spoken of so fondly by the Third Doctor. And then it shifts to the present day, in an English village called Cheltenham Boniface, and its church, haunted by a lone intelligence that's been named Saul by the parishioners. And then, in Perivale in the late 70s, school bully Chad Boyle takes a brick and bludgeons a young Ace to death. Before he's tried in juvenile court, Chad is taken away in the TARDIS by the Doctor, to kill Ace again. And that's how you know this is a very, very different kind of book. It actually works as a prologue rather than simply a chapter 1, because we don't get to follow up on these events for quite a while, the action suddenly moving away as the main book starts. It's a bit like one of those Moffat two-parters where instead of resolving the cliffhanger, part 2 starts an entirely new narrative altogether. At night, Ace hears the Doctor landing the TARDIS, putting props in place to help tie up loose ends, the manipulation and chess playing often referenced with the 7th Doctor. It's something we only usually get glimpses of, bits of foreknowledge and occasional lucky coincidence that's anything but, although the suggestion is that he's always spinning plates to keep on top of it, spending each night setting up a future adventure or tidying up after a previous one. This is wonderfully turned on its head by the reveal that, since the events of the previous book, the Timewyrm has been in control of the Doctor's nocturnal adventures, setting up this entire trap for him without his knowledge. The first TARDIS scene is cosy, the kind of thing you'd expect in an episode from any era of the show. Ace had a Happy Mondays poster on her TARDIS bedroom wall and fancies Tim Booth from James. This was before he started to look like Anton LaVey. But her musical credentials are smashed when it's revealed she has a t-shirt of The Farm. When's Ace meant to be from anyway? I thought she'd been taken away from Earth in sort of the mid to late 80s before any of those bands were realistically going to be on her radar. Maybe Manchester happened a few years early in the universe. Mind you, she also used to be friends with anarcho-punks and once hitchhiked to Morecambe to attend a thrash metal gig. Her taste for fairly inoffensive jazz in Silver Nemesis feels very quaint at this point. These are all subtly referenced when she and friend Trisha don't recognise an anarchy symbol or thrash metal band Voivod in an alternate life. The Doctor mentions having met Sherlock Holmes, which doesn't remotely tie in with upcoming novel All-Consuming Fire, although admittedly Holmes isn't real here. Maybe this was an undocumented trip to the land of fiction. They quickly land in Cheltenham Boniface, a village in Norfolk which the Doctor has some affinity for, having visited several times in the past, and it being a place Cornell had written about several times himself in his fanzine stories. The first conversation Ace has with a new character has him drooling over her, although it is at least portrayed as an overly bawdy and unpleasant behaviour from a drunk rather than simply normal like in past novels. And then Hemmings appears. Cornell had asked Terence Dicks to write the character into Timewyrm Exodus because he knew how he wanted to use him here. It's likely the role would have simply had a different name in that book. But here he's around for some time, a fairly blunt but effective tool to represent everything Ace stands against. A Nazi and one utterly proud and defiant in his beliefs, one who has no issues torturing her. He feels like the kind of person her bully, Chad Boyle, could have turned into if left to his own devices. Bizarrely, Hemmings seems to have changed his name from Anthony to Rupert, although this is something that Cornell would resolve many books later. But this is all a dry description of plot and doesn't come close to explaining why this book is such a phenomenal change of pace. There's an indescribable quality in the writing of Revelation that just makes it leap off the page. Whether it's in the pace and content of the story, the words used, or combination, I'm not sure. I was always very good at English literature, my only A-star grade at school, but I don't have the mind of a literary scholar, so it's hard to come up with a full explanation. But there's that element in writing, the sort of magic that makes a book a joy to simply read. The words are actively pleasurable to absorb rather than simply means to a narrative end. Cornell is a practitioner of this kind of magic and it's fully on display here. While I spent the majority of Genesis and Apocalypse forcing myself to get through a few more pages before the relief of being able to put the book down, eyes skimming over paragraphs with a lazy lack of enthusiasm, here I enjoyed every sentence, often going back over moments to read them again. After this striking first act, the book departs reality entirely, now existing within the Doctor's mind. Ace finds herself in what she is informed is the afterlife. Although in her exploration she stumbles across past incarnations of the Doctor, the first as a librarian, the third kidnapped and tortured by Hemmings. The fourth is the ferryman who lets the third and seventh Doctors cross over into the pit at the centre of the mindscape. It's actually pretty fun to see the diametrically opposite third and fourth Doctors winding each other up, two characters who never met each other on screen. The fifth acts as the Doctor's conscience, tied to a tree. The Doctor confirms that they're in a place split into 7 locations. At the centre there is that pit, leading to all manner of horrors. The horrors are of course the Doctor's guilt. Of course in her afterlife, Ace ends up in hell, which starts out as being trapped in a school, bullied once again by Chad Boyle, only with the teachers on his side. Both she and the Doctor have to go through a serious amount of growth to escape. Boyle acts as an antagonist throughout, bringing doubt and insecurity to Ace, pushing her adult self back into its childhood fear. There's something genuinely horrifying about adult Ace being attacked and traumatised by her childhood bully. He still is a child. The bullying in itself is horrible, but an adult bullied by a child who has the upper hand holds an almost indescribable grotesqueness. The first time I read this book I was genuinely angry, reading about a school bully who found himself able to go further than he ever would in real life and facing no consequences. It's not often a writer can wrench such a visceral response from me. While all this is happening, they're supported in the real world by Saul the Church, Reverend Trelaw, and Peter and Emily Hutchins, 2 Sheldon Boniface newcomers who'd popped into the church to say hello. Peter is a scientist, Emily a linguist, and combined with the Vicar's conscience and Saul's powers, they're perfectly suited to the task of helping out the Doctor and Ace. They're also saddled with a baby with no sign of life beyond basic autonomic functions. They provide some grounding in reality, normality, and humour. Okay, the church is on the moon, but that aside. As well as a mystery as to their connection with the rest of the story. The climax finds the Doctor, who had of course planned this entire affair in advance, failing as usual. His schemes in the TV series always fell apart at the last moment, endangering Ace, with Ace now trapped as a consciousness inside his mind, expected to die alongside the Timewyrm. And so it's up to her to save the day by descending into the pit at the centre of the Doctor's mental landscape, and freeing the conscience he's been suppressing, the thing causing the guilt that manifests all his dead companions, fallen unit soldiers and so on. In succeeding, Ace allows the Doctor to treat the Timewyrm with compassion, offering to save her instead of destroying her. She agrees, and the human element of her consciousness ends up as the personality inhabiting a mindless baby the Doctor and Ace save from a genetic laboratory in the future. Peter and Emily adopt her, and her name is Ishtar. This would not be the last time we hear from her. The whole story hangs off a series of brilliantly imaginative and wonderfully weird images. A sentient church, a pub of friendly locals all turning on the Doctor at the same second, Ace being kidnapped by a child in a spacesuit, The Doctor speaking a word that sounds like breaking glass, Ace running out of a forest and straight onto the surface of the moon, a man pulling off a human mask to reveal a space helmet beneath, the Timewyrm sculpting Chad's face into that of a demonic blue creature, albeit still with a child's eyes, a church leaving Earth, its energy weight creating an explosion wiping out an enormous chunk of English countryside, the phrase, "the circus of biologically curious clowns," the Doctor dancing with the personification of death on the surface of the moon, yes, that cover is an actual scene from the book, a long procession of individuals inadvertently killed by the Doctor, Time Lords, Silurians, Daleks, Unit soldiers, Katarina, Sarah and Adric, a disembodied head croaking its last words, Ace as a trendy boy-obsessed teen, a gem that causes people to hallucinate the time tunnel from late 70s opening Doctor Who credits, and countless others. The best thing is that these are never simply stunts or set pieces, they all play a part, no matter how small, in the actual story. Another of the many things Paul Cornell really does right is making the Timewyrm a genuine villain. In the past two books she's not really shown any hint of being the universe-threatening creature of Gallifreyan legend, but here finally she's showing what she's capable of, messing up timelines, seriously harming the main characters and generally being all-round evil. Yet she's never portrayed as fully evil, she's beyond good and evil, she behaves less with malice and more out of instinct, doing what she must to survive. She bears a grudge on the Doctor for him thwarting her past plans, but otherwise she doesn't wish harm out of nastiness, just out of a somewhat selfish desire to survive at all costs. And this is what affords the Doctor the chance of saving her, and the universe with her, by appealing to her self-preservation, and showing that he can keep her alive without her needing to kill or to burrow deeper into her resentment. That said, for all its grim seriousness, the book retains a core of humour throughout. The Timewyrm and Doctor homage Goldfinger with a "do you expect me to talk? No, I expect you to die" moment. There's a brief mention of a Martin Day, on-off boyfriend of Ace's friend Tricia, and of course the name of a future Virgin New Adventures writer. When Saul the Sentient Church mutters, "Oh dear, strange things are happening again," I can't help but hear it in the voice of Boney from Trapdoor. Doctor Who's history is full of stories that have an impact and change the direction of the series. The War Machines, the Invasion, Earthshock, Remembrance of the Daleks, they all created a new type of Doctor Who that, in the following years, became a type of template, a starting point that all stories followed. Timewyrm Revelation is one of those. This is where the Virgin New Adventures really start, by utterly throwing away the entire format of Classic Who, and instead using its constituent parts as elements of an entirely new series, one that explores characters and emotion, one that asks philosophical questions and isn't afraid to go for the gut. It would take a while for this to percolate out into the wider series. By the time it's published, Darvel Evans had commissioned books at least a year ahead, and so its influence took a while to surface. Indeed, in late '93 there is more than one book that owes significant debt to Revelation. But it goes beyond the VNAs into the 8th Doctor adventures, the best of which are fairly similar, and even the original Russell T Davies era of the show. Series 1's Father's Day shares a lot of its DNA with Revelation, from the heart-wrenching emotion right down to the change in a companion's past timeline and the church setting. When writing Father's Day, Cornell was apparently told to use his New Adventures voice. Davies has cited this exact book as an inspiration on his version of Doctor Who being a chance to explore character as much as plot. The multiple Doctors inside the Doctor's head foreshadow 2022's Power of the Doctor. The differences between the classic and 2005 series are influenced by a huge range of things, among them simply the changing landscape of mainstream TV drama, but the style of the New Adventures ushered in with this book is very much one of them, and it's something that carries on to this day. Season 1 of the 2024 soft reboot almost doubles down on this influence. It's also the first time the phrase "never cruel or cowardly" is used in an in-universe text. This section is in fact the entire paragraph describing the Doctor's character from 1976's Making of Doctor Who, from which that quotation originates, which is a lovely Easter egg. It has of course gone on to be used multiple times in the new series. On that note, continuity-wise there's a ton of stuff. As I said, this is where the New Adventures really start, and a lot of the images and themes from this book appear again later in the series. It is of course the first time we meet Death, here merely a construct created by the Timewyrm. Cornell even takes the opportunity to correct John Peel's blunder of having Ace remember Paradise Towers by her casually recalling the TARDIS had accidentally given her one of Mel's memories. there's a brief reference to Johnny Chess, a recurring side character who will pop up several times in the novel ranges. The Doctor's absence in the alternate timeline of Inferno is revealed to be because he was, in fact, in the guise of one of the alternate faces offered to him at the end of the War Games, the fascist leader in charge of Earth. The Doctor's eyes change from blue to green, the start of a series of eye colour changes that will occur throughout the VNAs. Emily, one of the people trapped in the church on the moon, travels into the Doctor's mind and believes she is alone except for the other. The second Doctor doesn't turn up because he was ousted from his normal place in the Doctor's mind during his dream appearances in Timewyrm Apocalypse. Ace initially believes her own dreamscape afterlife is Chroma Beach. This really is a lot of back-referencing for a guy who's famous for saying, when continuity gets in the way of the story, at the very instant that it does, rewrite without hesitation. Timewyrm Revelation is not an easy book to read. Not just because of its complex metaphysical themes and structures, but because it's very, very unpleasant in places. Characters use racial slurs, although only to show that they really are horrible racists. The depictions of bullying are sometimes brutal, and this is how you do adult Doctor Who. You make the story emotional and challenging, and simply not something a child would be able to fully grasp. You use continuity as a way to explore the show's themes in its past, not simply to show you remember a certain number of episodes. Ultimately, Timewyrm Revelation is a book about Doctor Who. It's about the show's history, its legacy, its characters and its themes, but also about its future and its potential. It deconstructs the Doctor's character and reassembles him without some of the questionable baggage of his 80s characterisation. It offers Ace respite from the angst without simply papering over her issues. It closes with a stronger Doctor and Ace, closer than ever, looking forward to new adventures, hopefully ones that will have as much to say as this one. Sadly, as previously mentioned, it took a couple of years for this template to fully take hold and direct the books, and almost all the good work done here would be undone fairly swiftly in the coming novels. But that's a story for another video. In terms of favourite quotes, there are altogether too many moments to mention, almost every page featuring a memorable image or striking piece of dialogue, but a couple really stood out to me. She had a face that could be soft and beautiful, but would suddenly frown in a dangerous anger, an anger that could blow the world apart for its sins. Dead? How did it happen? The woman checked her book. Oxygen starvation, brought about from finding yourself on the moon, having believed the place to be Norfolk. I do believe that's unique. Well, said Ace, fixing a piton from her rucksack into the cliff and tying the end of a nylon rope to it. If this is a book, it's a severely strange one. That last wonderfully meta quote is quite apt because Revelation was initially the least well received of the Timewyrm novels in reviews. The idea that Doctor Who was a kids' show still dominated at the time. As Paul Cornell has since said, in contrast to the fanzine world he came from, Revelation is positively mild, but for those expecting more of the TV show, this heavily philosophical, spiritual and metatextual book about bullying, guilt, forgiveness and the nature of one's own identity was baffling. John Nathan Turner notoriously disliked it. I love reading, I love books, I adore prose and interesting use of the English language. I'm not a big fan of people who over-romanticise books, mind you, especially at the expense of television, which is seen by some snobs as lowest common denominator rubbish. I believe all forms of media have the ability to communicate transformative ideas and images. At the same time, it's undeniable that the novel is a much more suitable home for this kind of story, and to simply run the novel line as if it were TV Doctor Who with a bit more violence and swearing would be to waste the potential of the written word. Over time, thankfully, this viewpoint has become more popular, and Timewyrm Revelation has become known as a superb book and a cornerstone of Wilderness Years Doctor Who. Next time, the second of the VNA series starts, Cat's Cradle, with Mark Platt's first novel, Time's Crucible. And if you thought Revelation was a complex format-breaking story, you ain't seen nothing yet. In the meantime, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do let me know what you thought of this book, either at the time or revisiting it in recent years. You can comment below this video. There are also like, share and subscribe buttons you might like to press. And I hope to see you next time.